I want to thank you for joining me for this month's Ask Me Anything webinar, Caring for Aging Parents. Are you ready? It's the latest in Apprise's Ask Me Anything webinar series. We've been doing these webinars either once or twice a month, going back to last fall. In today's agenda, we're going to discuss the topics listed here, but if you have any other related questions, please throw them in the chat. I'll be happy to address those as well. I did receive a question in advance, and I will answer that at the end. So there's an increased need for caregiving in general. Today, more than 1 in 5 Americans, that's 21.3%, are caregivers. That means they provided care to an adult or child with special needs at some time in the last 12 months. All told, that's an estimated 53 million adults who provided care in the US, up from an estimated 43.5 million caregivers in 2015. Caregiving is also up among all racial and ethnic groups, educational levels, work statuses, genders, and nearly all generations. This mirrors results found in other studies of caregiving over time. The increase in prevalence may be due to any of the following reasons: an increasingly aging baby boomer population requiring more care, limitations or workforce shortages in healthcare or long-term services and supports, formal care systems, increased efforts by states to facilitate home and community-based services, an increasing number of Americans who are self-identifying that their daily activities in support of their family members and friends with health or financial limitations include caregiving, or it could simply be a confluence of all those different trends. So one of the hardest parts about this is starting the conversation. So how do you get started? Well, the first thing is, remember that a good offense makes for the best defense. You want to discuss problems before they arise. You don't want to wait too long. It can be really difficult to enter yourself into your parents' finances, especially if you've never talked about them before. That's another reason you want to start early. You want to consider raising the topic in conjunction with major life transitions. That can include retirement, the sale of a family home. You want to be gentle about it. You don't want to upset anybody. You want to be sure to treat your parents with respect. You want to emphasize that it's your goal and your desire to keep them safe above all else. You also want to make sure that you listen and understand their point of view and what matters to them. If your parents work with other trusted professionals, see if you can join them the next time they have a meeting with them. If they have a financial advisor, see if you can come along. If they're going to see their attorney, see if you can come along. You want to be sensitive. Remember that these aren't easy or fast conversations. It can take time for parents and their adult children to come to terms with this shift in role. It's a big thing. One conversation is rarely, likely never, enough. Actions are usually taken in a series of small steps. They don't all happen at once. And don't expect all duties will immediately be signed over to you, the adult child. And also, if you have siblings, make sure that you include them and there's buy-in and everybody kind of knows what their role is and what they're supposed to do and it's agreed upon. Okay. What do you need to know and can help with? You need to know more than the basics. You want to make sure you know how to contact professionals your parents work with. That it would include doctors, attorneys, geriatric care managers, their financial advisors, any other important persons. You want to make sure you have phone numbers for friends and family members. You want to be able to help with things like exercise and nutrition because that can help your parents stay healthy and hopefully means that they'll need less help. You want to make sure they have access to some type of transportation because that can keep them from feeling trapped when it's no longer safe for them to drive. If you're having trouble with a conversation and you work with a financial advisor and your parents don't, you can introduce your financial advisor to your parents. Let your advisor become your parents' point of contact. Another option is try approaching your parents as if you were relaying a message from your advisor. Parents can be more receptive if an adult child approaches them saying their advisor recommended they discuss getting help with their finances. We're going to delve most deeply into finances of these topics here, but you also want to make sure that you look at estate planning and legal issues, the health and medical support system. As I said, you want to make sure that you help your parents get adequate exercise and nutrition if you can, and make transportation arrangements, help them. And with Uber and things like that, it's a lot easier than it used to be. When should you step in? Well, if your parents don't want to willingly share their information, try observing their behavior. If you observe one or more of the things that are here, such as they're not paying their bills or they're double paying their bills, you see unusual purchases, there's some type of signs of scams or fraud and things like that, then you may need to step in and help. That's why I say it's good if you can have the conversation early. And by having the conversation early, hopefully you can make things a lot easier than waiting until it's too late and when it's much harder. On the financial side, you really want to get to know your parents' finances. You want to understand what your parents own and what they owe, their balance sheet or their assets and liabilities. You want to know what their debts are because you want to make sure that they're paid. You want to make sure that you know if they have property taxes on their home. If they own their home free and clear, then there's no more escrow, but you want to make sure that those taxes are being paid. If they have insurance policies, you want to make sure the premiums are being paid. You want to know all about their regular bills, any outstanding debts, their budget if they have one. Also, you want to find out how they pay their bills. Because if you know how they pay their bills, hopefully you can put in an automated system to make it happen automatically so you don't have to worry about it, right? You can go into their bank account and schedule it. You just have to make sure the funds are there. As part of understanding where the records are kept, be sure to find out if they have an accountant, a financial planner, an attorney, an insurance agent. So if you want to know how to access their accounts, so you want to know their account passwords and things like that. Also, remember that we don't get all the statements in the mail. Some things may come through email. So you want to know how to access their email account as well. And you want to be able to schedule the automatic payments to protect their assets. If your parents have a safe deposit box, you want to ask them if you can become a co-lessee. Otherwise, it can be really hard to access it. And if there's any important documents there, they may be more easily stored at home in a fireproof safe deposit box or safe. You also want to know about what their important end-of-life legal documents are. So that includes a general power of attorney, which allows the agent or you, if you're that agent, to make both medical and financial decisions for your parents, regardless of whether they're incapacitated. You can have a limited power of attorney, which provides you with very specific or limited powers, and they end at a time specified in the document. A durable power of attorney takes effect the moment it's signed. It grants you the powers defined in that letter. A springing power of attorney takes effect only if the grantor or your parent becomes incapacitated. And also you need to know how to locate and make sure that they have a last will and testament, because that can make things a lot easier when your parents pass, because there's certain things that don't need to go through the will to pass, and that makes probate much easier and less costly. You want to help protect your parents from scams or fraud. Here's some examples. Phishing schemes, which are typically emails, telemarketing fraud, con men posing as repairmen. I know I've heard about that from some elderly people, charity scams. And then I list some websites here, and you can use those to find information about other common scams, as well as the second link, the lower link at the last bullet point, which provides you some tips on how to avoid an online scam. Because online scams are particularly, have grown more and more common, especially since COVID hit. I talked about healthy aging and helping your parents in that regard. Some important considerations, you want to think about nutrition, because that's really the key to healthy aging. If your parents aren't eating well, consider services such as Meals on Wheels, or have their grocery shopping and meal prep done for them. You can even have things shipped to them. There's lots of ways to get meals and food shipped, by ordering over the internet and having it sent. If you can have healthy, easy to prepare meals and snacks on hand, that can help improve their health and energy level. You also want to encourage your parents to exercise regularly. This can include walking, swimming, taking senior-specific exercise classes, golfing, or other activities that can help them maintain their strength, stamina, and balance. If your parent's mobility has declined, make sure they have the necessary modifications to remain active, including things like mobility aids, exercise bands, or home equipment. Ideas for exercising from a wheelchair or chair. You can find those on the internet. And for their home, prepare a repair and maintenance checklist to make sure that everything's taken care of. And if they live on a home that has steps, can they live on the first floor? You also want to understand what they want from accommodations if they need to move. Make sure it fits their needs and their wants and desires, not yours. And do they need you to help? Do they need your help to arrange that for them or to help them with that? Also important, don't forget to take care of you. Taking care of an aging parent can be time-consuming and emotionally difficult, especially if your loved one's health is declining. You should establish boundaries to what you can and cannot do. Don't overextend yourself. If you can't be the primary caregiver or unable to perform certain tasks, ask for help. If you have siblings, figure out ways to share some of the responsibilities. You also have to make sure that you set boundaries. Sometimes you have to say no or reinforce your boundaries, because otherwise it's going to make it even harder on you. You also want to make sure to set aside some me time. If you're constantly on the go, it can run you down. It can deplete your energy. You don't want to overextend yourself. You don't want to feel overworked or underappreciated. Before that happens, make sure you have some time for yourself. If you need to get out and go for a walk, do it. If you need to take a weekend away, do it. Do what you need to recharge your batteries so that you're at your as best as you can be when you need to be. Some final thoughts on this. You want to make sure that this is a family matter. If you have siblings, be sure to include them and involve them from the very beginning. Don't bring them in late, because it can only lead to disputes. You may want to talk to each parent separately. Why? Your mother or father may feel freer to talk candidly about any struggles their spouse is having when they're not in the room together. Going back to siblings for a minute, you want to define the roles that the various siblings are going to play. You want to decide who among the siblings would be the best candidate to fill roles such as the power of attorney, managing the financial accounts. Who's the most financially literate person in the family? They're probably the best person to manage the finances. Who's emotionally strong enough to handle the challenges? Who has the relationship with your parents that would facilitate a transition in handling their financial affairs? All those things matter. You want to make sure you have a plan. You want to start with gathering all the relevant materials, everything from financial statements to health records. You want to create a file with caregivers' contact information too. You want to evaluate your choices for roles such as power of attorney, housing preferences, and medical directives. And remember that waiting too long can leave you with fewer options. But don't wait too long. So if you want to talk about this more, you can use this link to get to my calendar and schedule a strategy session. You can also take our retirement readiness quiz. That's not what I'm sorry. It's an aging parents readiness quiz. I apologize, the slide's wrong. It's an aging parents readiness quiz. It helps you assess how ready you are to help your aging parents. For attending today, I'm going to send you a copy on Friday, tomorrow. And if you're not on our distribution list, there's a link that you can do that. And we had a couple blogs this month on this topic as well. So I did get one question that I'm going to address first. The question was some strategies to invest in elderly parents' funds for capital preservation and liquidity. Yeah. Certainly, this is something that's a lot harder in the present environment because interest rates are so low. But there are some things that you can do. You want to understand what your parents' current cash needs are. What do they spend on a regular basis? So what's their rent? What are their average utilities? What are their food bills? Do they have any other debts and things like that that they're paying down? Then think about what's their steady or regular income that's coming in, right? Do they have any annuities maybe? So some people do have those. I mean, generally that's not something that I push people towards because they're expensive, but sometimes people already have them. And if you do, they can be a source of income. If they have a portfolio, what kind of income are they typically getting from their portfolio? So then you want to figure out how much cash do they need over the next 18 to 24 months on a net basis. Make sure you set that aside. I know that there's not a lot of great options from an income perspective with that cash because interest rates are so low, but it's there to protect you during a market downturn, because I always talk about the fact that the last thing that we want to try to do as investors is buy high and sell low. So if we have the cash set aside, it helps to protect us and keep us from selling cash and from selling securities during a market downturn and locking in those losses, right? And then the typical market downturn has been 18 to 24 months on average. So if you have that much cash, and then when the market comes back, then you can sell some securities at higher values to replenish the cash and keep that safety net there. And when I talk about current income, don't forget, so I said, Social Security is one I didn't mention before. If they have any Social Security or pension income, certainly take that into consideration. You want to take dividends and interest that they have from their investments, and as I said, any annuities, and then determine how much cash to set aside. So let's take an example. Let's say that your parents need $10,000 a month. I'm just picking that number because it's going to be easy to work with math-wise. And let's say that their Social Security benefits are $4,000 a month. And let's say that they have a pension that's another $1,000 a month, so now they're up to $5,000. And let's say that their income from all their investments, dividends, interest, annuities, et cetera, is another $2,000. So they have $7,000 coming in. And then they have $10,000 a month of expenses. So that's $3,000 a month that they're short. And I didn't factor taxes into that. So you probably want to add some extra money for taxes on top of that. And let's just, for purposes of this example, say taxes are another, let's say they're another $3,000 a year. So another $250 a month. So you need $3,250 a month times 12 is going to be $39,000 a year, or $78,000. And that would kind of be like that safety net that I talked about. And I also discussed this more in the blog that you see linked here about creating a retirement paycheck. It kind of goes through the concept in a little bit more detail. And if you really are concerned about making sure that they have regular income coming in, you can consider something like a income annuity. You just want to be careful about the fees associated with those. And usually the way those work is you put an amount of money in. So like the downside of an income annuity is that you put in X amount of dollars today, and then you're guaranteed a certain amount of income. But then when the person who has that income annuity passes, the rest of the money's gone. So you've kind of lost your principal. But it is an alternative that you can use to help protect you. And sometimes people do that, things like that, like let's say at a certain age, because it'll help you get through. Like maybe you say, all right, up to 80, I'm going to cover it myself, and then I want to put this income annuity in after that. So that way it's a way to kind of help spread out how your assets last and help keep you afloat. That's it for the formal part of the presentation. I'm going to allow the three of you everybody to talk. So if you have any questions, feel free to send it to me. You can also put them in the chat, whatever works for you. And I'll be here for a couple of minutes. If nobody has any questions, then I will end. But in the meantime, if you have any questions, Ron?
Yes, I'm typing it, but about bond funds. I was looking at that for my mother, and just wanted to know that they're the ones that some people do to consider, or funds which are managed, and they take it out of your return. Wanted to get your thoughts.
You said bond funds, is that what you said?
Yes, actively managed bond funds.
So as a general rule, I use more or less index type, where they're managed against an index because they're less expensive. And there's one that I use on occasion that's managed that may be worth considering, but generally because rates are so low, I'm not real keen with the idea of paying the fees that come with those, because I think it's just going to, your returns aren't high enough to justify it. And in a higher interest rate environment, there's a lot more you could do, right? Like you could own individual bonds and things like that too. You have to be careful when you're looking at any fund. You want to look at what's referred to as duration. The duration of a bond fund is essentially interest rates. So think about the lower the duration of a bond fund is, the less sensitive it is to interest rates. And if we think about the fact that there could be inflation, we don't want to have bonds that have high duration, because that means that they're more sensitive to interest rates. So for example, if a bond had a duration of 10, if one bond fund had a duration of 10, and you can find that information, I think it's on Morningstar, and another one had a duration of 5, the one with the duration of 10 is going to move 2 times as much when interest rates change as the one with the duration of 5. I mean, you take the duration times the change in interest rates, and that should give you an idea how much the fund moves. So you want to I tend to skew things towards either short-term or intermediate-term bonds in an environment like this. I don't want to go too long, because I'm really worried that if rates go up, my principal is going to be eroded because of the change in rates, because bonds move, the principal value of a bond moves opposite to interest rates. So when interest rates go up, the principal goes down. When interest rates go down, the principal value goes up.
Got it. So I don't know if, I'm sorry, I was late to joining over here, and I don't know what was covered, but for my mother, she wants to know what to do with, she's got a certain amount of money that she wants to do something with, and she wants to be able to draw a certain amount of money. And I know you covered that just as I jumped in. I was just, maybe it's a recap, or maybe it's something we talk about offline.
I really saved that part to the end, because instead of putting it into the regular part of the webinar, I just decided I'd save it for the Q&A part. So you heard, for the most part, what I had to say about that. I'm happy to have a conversation with you about it offline, or we can continue here. Really, whatever is better for you is fine with me.
And it would be up to the other, I don't want to take up time for your other participants if they have other questions or they've heard it already.
I think it's fine, because you're the only, right now, you're the only one that's off mute. So I think it's okay.
Oh, okay. Yeah, maybe if you wouldn't mind then to maybe just recap what you would recommend for somebody to do who are trying to get, have a certain amount of money, and they figured out how much they need to withdraw from it, while trying to, from their principal, but while also trying to get a little bit of a return on that principal that remains.
So the first thing that I think about, so as investors, we want to worry about longevity risk, which is the risk that we outlive our money. And we want to worry about sequency of return risk, which is that we have that really bad year when we can't recover from it. And so when we start working, that's a lot more damaging. But as we move further away from retirement, it has less of an impact, just because we have fewer years left.
Right.
So I get back to the concept that I mentioned, like, think about what the expenses are and make sure that you have enough to cover those for at least 24 months. Maybe you want to be a little bit more conservative and go out further. And so, like, when I do that, like, think about what Social Security income is, think about any other money that's coming in regularly, and offset that against the expenses to figure out how much left you need, and then make that safe so that you know that you have that protection. And then that allows you to not have to be extremely conservative with every penny that you have, because you know that you're protected, right? That's a way to protect you. I mean, unless we had a Japan type situation where we just had a market that was down for years and years and years.
Right.
Historically, taking an approach like what I just said should serve you well. And the old argument was that as we get older, we should be more conservative, right? And go more and more towards bonds. But the problem is that bonds don't provide any growth. And if you go back to what I said before about the principal value of a bond moving in the opposite direction to interest rates, well, interest rates are really low. Unless we go negative, it's unlikely that they go much lower, right? So your bigger risk is that as rates rise, the value of your principal falls and you end up in a worse position. So you don't want to have too many bonds because of that either. It's okay to have stocks, no matter what your age is, especially if they provide a return. Like you might not want to have a lot of growth stocks in a portfolio for somebody that's in retirement, but certainly you can have some dividend paying stocks. And so like from a sector perspective, the stocks that I usually find the highest dividends in would be either utilities or banks or REITs, so real estate income trusts, or there's some consumer goods companies and healthcare companies. You can find companies in those sectors that pay good dividends. Even and telecom would be another one. Like those are the sectors that I usually look to for yield.
Right.
And you should be able to build a portfolio. Like when I look at what the models that I use, you know, a 30-70, meaning 30% stocks, 70% bonds, 40-60, 50-50 type portfolios. You should be able to structure those to yield at least 1.5 to 2%, even in this environment, like when you factor in everything. So that gives you some income. And like when I do that, I don't use I think that bonds still have a diversification benefit, even though interest rates are so low. But at the same time, I don't want to eliminate bonds from a portfolio because interest rates are low because of that diversification benefit. But I know that they're not providing the same income that they have historically. So in that case, I do think about it within my equity allocation. I'm going to increase the reliance that I have on my portfolio to provide income. You know, you don't have to do it with individual stocks too. You can also do it. There are a number of dividend focused or equity income type ETFs or mutual funds that can provide a good yield. So I want to look to those for my yield. And so like, I will say sometimes I'll put a stock in a portfolio though, I'll go back to individual stocks for a second, say, well, I know this stock has a good yield. I know it's a solid company. I don't really care so much about what happens to the daily value of it. I'm putting it there because I believe that over the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, whatever, that company is still going to exist. It's going to pay a slowly growing, but slowly increasing dividend over time. And it's going to provide me some income that has tremendous value to me. And that dividend, the value of that dividend is worth more to me. I don't care what happens to the value of the stock as much. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And if you take a historical perspective that, you're in it for a while, if you're not really all that, you're not caring so much about the stock's daily or even yearly pricing, but it's paying you a nice dividend, and it makes an awful lot of sense.
Yeah, it does. I think so. Like I have there's a number of clients that I work with that's where they are. And so that's what I do is I look for some good, solid companies that I think are paying a nice yield. And I say, if that stock goes down 10% or even 20%, as long as it keeps paying the dividend, I don't care.
Right.
It's paying me that dividend, and that principal value doesn't matter that much because it's there for a different reason. It's there to provide my portfolio with income to live on.
Right.
And too, that over the long term, it's probably going to come back to where it is. I might get, there's two components to owning any security there's two components to return, right? It's a total return. So it's the appreciation in the value of the asset plus the income that it already pays you. And as long as I'm getting what I want out of it, from that income perspective, I'm okay with the other.
Sure. Great. Okay. Thank you. That answers my question.
Oh, I'm glad.
Anybody else?
Nothing else from me. If there's no other questions, I'm going to end in a second run. If you do have other questions, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to